Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The John Allen Show, brought to you by the fantastic folks at the Word on Fire Institute. I am John Allen. I'm the editor of Crux. It's an independent, online Catholic news source. We try to be your 24/7 destination for the very best in smart, wired, and independent Catholic journalism. You can find us online at cruxnow.com. That is cruxnow.com. I am also the host of The Crux of the Matter on the Catholic Channel, Sirius XM 129 on your radio dial. We air Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have a chance, do give us a listen. And in addition to all that, I am a proud fellow at the Word on Fire Institute of Bishop Robert Barron. Now, their resources are online at wordonfire.institute. That is wordonfire.institute. You'll find the latest and greatest from Bishop Barron and much more beyond, so bookmark it, spend some time there, check it out. It's well worth doing. I am coming to you this week, as I always do, from the Eternal City, Caput Mundi, the crossroads of the Catholic world here in Rome, broadcasting from the studios of our great friends at Longbeard. That's a digital marketing and design company. They know the Catholic world inside out. And their studios here in Rome are immediately adjacent to the great Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, that's St. Mary Major, where in the historic Borghese Chapel you will find the famed icon of Maria Salus Populi Romani, Mary, health of the Roman people, who is kind of the great protectress, if you like, of the city of Rome. We'd like to put this show under her protection as well. So Maria Salus Populi Romani, ora pro nobis. All right, as I always do in this show, I'm going to lay out for you three big-ticket stories that have been moving through the bloodstream in the Vatican and in the global Catholic Church and in the U.S. Then later in the show, we will try to take those stories apart and put them back together and make sense of them. This week, as a kind of bonus item for sticking with us, I'm also going to throw in a personal reflection at the end. But first, our menu. We begin with a new papal encyclical. We now know that Pope Francis is set to issue the third encyclical of his pontificate. Now, an encyclical is, in a sense, the most important, the most developed form of papal teaching. Among other things, it is typically the longest. To date, Pope Francis has issued two, Lumen Fidei in 2013, a text that was largely prepared by his predecessor, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and of course, Laudato Si in 2016, his landmark encyclical on the environment and on care of creation, first encyclical letter by a pope ever devoted entirely to the theme of ecology. The new one is titled Tutti Fratelli, and that can either be translated as all brothers or all brothers and sisters. We'll talk about the small kerfuffle over what it should be called later on. But in any event, it is a document on human fraternity and solidarity, and obviously intended to be the Pope's reflection on the new realities of a post-COVID-19 world, what lessons we ought to be learning from the pandemic, where we are, and where we need to go from here. He'll be traveling to Assisi, the birthplace of his namesake St. Francis, on October 3rd to sign the encyclical. That, of course, is the vigil of the feast of St. Francis, and we should have it immediately after that. Now, second story making the rounds has to do with, it's another Pope Francis story, this time not having to do with encyclicals, but with synods. Synods of bishops are these gatherings of bishops from all over the world, convened by a pope to discuss some burning issue. Last one took place almost a year ago, in October of 2019. It was the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon. And recently, Pope Francis sort of lifted the curtain a bit on his private thinking about the way that synod played out, on the differences between a synod and a parliament. In a nutshell, Pope Francis thought that at least on one specific point, the last gathering of bishops was too much a parliament, not enough a synod. We will talk about what he meant by that and what the implications might be going forward. And then finally, this week, it's sort of a memo to Australia from the Vatican. A number of years ago, in 2013, actually, the same year Pope Francis was elected, the Australian government launched what is known as a royal commission to investigate some particular subject. In this case, it was a royal commission on institutional child sexual abuse. They ended up issuing a number of recommendations to the Catholic Church in Australia. The Australian bishops responded. Now the Vatican has responded to that response, so we will pick that apart as well. So that's your menu for this week. Stick around, because after a short break, I'm going to start serving up the plates.
Hey everybody, this is Jared Zimmer, the director of the Word on Fire Institute. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the John Allen Show, yet another production brought to you by the Word on Fire Institute. I wanted to just take a minute of your time to tell you a little bit about what you receive as a member of the Institute. So the Institute exists to be a formation arm of Bishop Barron's apostolate Word on Fire. We offer specialized courses in theology, philosophy, spirituality, practical evangelization, numerous other topics to help form you to be the best evangelist that you can be. Along with those courses, you have a lively forum where you can discuss the courses with the other students as well as the professors. You also get a quarterly journal called Evangelization and Culture. In that journal, we have interviews with folks such as Dave Rubin, Dr. Arthur Brooks. We discuss culture and cinema, you name it. We will bring it to you, again, as another tool to help you learn good evangelization in the modern world. Along with your membership, you also get free access to Word on Fire Digital. We're talking about hundreds of hours of Bishop Barron's content, so his feature films, his study series. You also get a free book, Bishop Barron's latest book called Centered, really diving deep into the spirituality of Word on Fire. So be sure to go to wordonfire.institute to learn more, and we'd love to see you inside.
Welcome back. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, our first story this week involves a papal encyclical. Now that is a term in Latin. It refers to a kind of circular letter. It refers to a time when really the only way for the Pope to get his thinking about something out was to send guys out on horseback to carry these letters around to the bishops of the Catholic world. Over time, it has come to be seen, an encyclical has come to be seen as sort of the most important, most significant form of papal teaching, and therefore fairly high up the food chain in terms of the Pope's magisterial authority, that is, his teaching authority. Pope Francis has been in office 8 years, and this will only be his third. The first came in 2013 when he issued a document called Lumen Fidei, the Light of Faith, which was sort of about reason and faith. It was the key theme of the papacy of his predecessor, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And most of that text, by Pope Francis's own free admission, was prepared by Benedict. So this was Francis, in effect, lending his own authority and putting his own stamp of approval on Benedict's thought. The first truly distinctive and original encyclical letter by Pope Francis came in 2016 with the Laudato Si on care for our common home, the care for creation. It was sort of Pope Francis's green manifesto. And as we all know, that encyclical was part of a trajectory in which Pope Francis has become, in effect, the chaplain, if you like, of the movement, the contemporary movement against climate change, against global warming, in favor of dramatic action to protect the environment. And in many ways, that document was a charter for the broader social agenda of his papacy. Now, that brings us to October 2020, when Pope Francis is set to issue the third such encyclical letter of his pontificate. The document is to be called Tutti Fratelli, and it is on human fraternity and solidarity. Now, we'll talk about the likely content of this document in a moment, but let's pause for a moment to talk about what it's called. Now, this title, Tutti Fratelli, is a quotation from St. Francis in his admonitions to members of his new community, what would become the Franciscan order. And there is a line in which Francis describes how in the Franciscan order, the ethos is to be that we are all tutti fratelli, all brothers. Now, he was referring, of course, in that historic moment, in that context, to men, and therefore one can make the argument that Tutti Fratelli is the appropriate translation of that reference. On the other hand, there are many who believe that Pope Francis obviously does not intend to address this encyclical only to men. Therefore, it would be better to use more inclusive terminology, and the most frequent candidate is calling it all brothers and sisters. To date, the Vatican has not yet said officially what the English translation is going to be. It is interesting to note that official Vatican news agencies themselves have translated it differently. Some have been saying brothers, some have been saying sisters. As a footnote, I would also note that the national anthem of Italy, where this conversation is now occurring, is actually Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, but it's widely understood here to mean everybody, men and women. So not sure how that is going to sort itself out, but the basic point to take away from all of this is that when Pope Francis himself made the decision to call this document Tutti Fratelli, he wasn't trying to exclude anybody. He was trying to quote his namesake, Saint Francis. And the fact that he's going to Assisi on the vigil of the Feast of St. Francis is confirmation of the point. All right, in terms of the likely content, let us remember that a year and a half ago, in February 2019, Pope Francis traveled to Abu Dhabi in a trip that was extraordinarily important for his outreach to the Islamic world, really to everyone beyond the borders of the Catholic Church. And while there, he signed what is now known as a document on human fraternity with the Grand Imam of the Al-Azhar Mosque and University in Cairo, which is widely known as sort of the Vatican of the Sunni Muslim world. That is the most authoritative institution within the branch of Islam that represents almost 80% of the world's 1.3 billion Muslims. And that document was about the quest for fraternity and for solidarity across the traditional dividing lines. Now, it was criticized at the time by some inside the church who said, well, but there's really nothing particularly Christian about this document, which of course was understandable when you're signing a document with an imam. You know, this can't be a tract from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This encyclical probably will provide Pope Francis an opportunity to provide a kind of Christian infrastructure for many of the conclusions already rolled out in that document. We will keep our eyes on it. All right, so the second story we mentioned at the top of the show, the Pope's reflections on the Synod for the Amazon. Recently, Italian Jesuit father Antonio Spadaro, widely known to be one of this Pope's closest friends and advisors, published an article in La Civiltà Cattolica, which is a semi-official Jesuit-edited journal, in which he talked about the Pope's governing philosophy and, among other things, quoted from some private reflections that Pope Francis had prepared on the Synod for the Amazon, in which Pope Francis said that he felt that the discussion over married priests at the Synod for the Amazon was too much like a parliament and not enough like a synod. Now, to set the stage, one of the hot-button issues, if not the hot-button issue at that Synod for the Amazon, was whether there should be an expansion in the ordination of married men to the priesthood in order to remedy chronic priest shortages, particularly in isolated rural communities in the Amazon. It was clear going in that was going to be debated. There were clearly two sides to that debate. They had a kind of vociferous argument. At the end of the day, when the Pope issued his concluding document for the Synod, he didn't adjudicate the question one way or the other. That is, he didn't say a clear no to married priests. He didn't say yes either. And so we're, for the moment, sort of at the status quo ante. Now, what Pope Francis says is that there was a rich parliamentary discussion of that issue in the Synod, but that's all it was, and he wanted it to be more synodal. What he appears to mean is that people came in to this debate with their positions already clear, pretty hard and fast, and they looked at the Synod as an opportunity to state their case as powerfully and effectively as they possibly could, rather than engaging in an honest exercise to listen to the concerns, the experiences, the perspectives of others, and perhaps rethinking their own inclinations in the search for a common solution open to where the Spirit may seem to be moving the Church. It's interesting to note, by the way, that much the same criticism could have been made of the two earlier synods on the family Pope Francis convened in 2014-2015, where the hot-button issue there was the question of whether Catholics who divorce and then remarry outside the church ought to be able to receive the sacraments, especially communion. Now, in that case, Pope Francis did pull the trigger. He made a decision, and he said in his concluding document that under some circumstances, the reception of the sacraments for such folks should be possible. Now, the fallout from that, whether this is what Pope Francis wanted or not, is that clearly one side felt it had won and the other side felt it had lost. Perhaps in this reflection on the Amazon Synod, what Pope Francis is saying is that he didn't like that. He doesn't like the impression that this is about a kind of partisan exercise of one ideological faction against another, everybody waiting with bated breath to see who's going to win in the end, and he wants these synods to play out differently. Now, what might be done to change the process, the composition, the rules, the ethos, if you like, of a Synod of Bishops to advance that aim remains to be seen. Let's remember that the Vatican's next scheduled synod is next year, 2021, and, ironically enough, it is supposed to be a synod on synodality, that is, a synod on synods. So in some ways, I think, one can see in these reflections Pope Francis already shaping the agenda, the to-do list, if you like, of that next synod. Of course, remains to be seen how it might play out in a post-COVID world in which large gatherings of people in close proximity are difficult to engineer. So the modality of this next synod, I think, is very much up in the air. Its content, however, and some of the bullet points that the Pope wants it to address, I think that is already clear in the Spadaro article we saw this past week. Finally, let's shift gears. Let us move from the Mediterranean basin, from Rome, the world of the Vatican, and let's go down under to the land of Oz, to Australia. In 2013, the Australian government, facing an expanding series of child sexual abuse scandals in a number of institutions in the country, including the Catholic Church, created what is known there as a Royal Commission. It is, in effect, the highest investigating authority in Australia that can be empowered by a government. And its mandate was to investigate the phenomenon of child sexual abuse in a number of different institutions, but it very much included the Catholic Church. This Royal Commission, over the course of the next several years, spent countless hours of hearings, collected thousands of pages of testimony, and in a variety of other ways tried to get to the bottom of the sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church. And at the end of it all, this commission issued a series of recommendations. Now, there were hundreds of such recommendations, but by far the two most eye-grabbing from a news point of view were that the Royal Commission recommended that the Catholic Church end mandatory priestly celibacy, the supposition there being that there is somehow a connection between priestly celibacy and a proclivity to abuse minors, or at least mandatory celibacy. And second, it recommended that the Catholic Church modify the seal of the confessional, that is, the guarantee that what happens in sacramental confession will remain confidential in cases of child sexual abuse. Basically, it wanted the Church to adopt a policy that priests who come to learn about child sexual abuse in the context of confession would be obliged to report it to the civil authorities. Now, no big surprise that in their initial reactions to the Royal Commission report, the Australian bishops, led by Archbishop Mark Coleridge, who was president of the conference, said that they would accept 98% of the recommendations made by the Royal Commission, but not those two particularly controversial ones. And they further said that they would submit their own reactions to the recommendations to the Vatican for further review. So in this past week, the Vatican released its response and essentially endorsed the position of the Australian bishops. Number one, it defended the discipline of priestly celibacy, saying that there is great spiritual value to the discipline, and strongly disputed the notion that there is a causal link between priestly celibacy and child sexual abuse, noting, among other things, the well-documented statistical fact that because most child sexual abuse actually occurs in the context of the family, it is therefore often being committed by non-celibate individuals. Further, it also strongly reasserted the seal of the confessional, arguing that the seal of the confessional, the confidentiality that attaches to the sacrament of confession, is at the heart of the sacrament, therefore invoked the notion of religious freedom in the idea that, because the Australian Constitution guarantees religious freedom, that it is inappropriate for a state to be dictating sacramental practice, something that cuts to the very core of the faith to any religious community. Further, made the practical argument that if you strip away the seal of the confessional, you are not helping the fight against child sexual abuse, you're actually hurting it. Because many victims discover the courage to come forward only after being able to talk about what happened to them in the context of confession, knowing that it will never be revealed or broadcast to anyone, and working with a priest that they trust over long stretches of time in many cases before they're prepared to be able to talk about this publicly. And if you take that away from them, you are making it less likely rather than more likely that reports are going to be made and that abuse is going to be eradicated. Now, probably no surprise that the Vatican would take those positions. It is exactly what you would expect the seat of government of the Universal Church to do. I do think it is slightly noteworthy, however, that in the context of this ongoing debate from the Amazon Synod about whether Pope Francis is or is not going to endorse an expansion in married priests, you have the Vatican making such a robust public defense of the discipline of priestly celibacy. Take that for what it's worth, but I think it's interesting. Finally, I will end this week with a brief personal reflection. One of the things that happened last week here in Rome that signaled we're sort of getting back to normal is that for the first time, Pope Francis held his Wednesday general audience with faithful present. Now, as fate would happen, my wife and I happen to be among those faithful. There is a tradition at these general audiences that the Italians call the sposi novelli. Basically, that means newlyweds. If you're recently married, you can show up, the wife in her wedding dress, the husband in his wedding suit, and you will get a personal blessing from the Pope at the end of the audience, kind of a blessing on your new marriage. Now, the rule is you have to be married within 3 months of your audience date. We were actually scheduled for March 25th. We were married in late January. But that was the first public audience canceled. And so, in their graciousness, the Vatican was willing to let us come this past Wednesday, even though the time limit had expired. And we had the opportunity to sit in the front row of that audience. Then at the end, Pope Francis came down. He spoke with us for what seemed an eternity, honestly. It was probably only 3 or 4 minutes on the clock. But when you have FaceTime with the Pope, every second matters. And then at the end, he gave us a blessing. Now, here's my personal reflection on all this. I professionally cover church politics. I spend probably 90% of my time covering fights over policy, over scandal, heartbreak, division, controversy. I analyze endlessly whether a particular pope zigs or zags facing policy crossroads. And I believe all of that is critically important, and I believe telling the truth, reporting that honestly and responsibly and fairly is a service not just to the church, to the world, but those moments when you are in the presence of the pastor of the universal church, the vicar of Christ on earth, the successor of St. Peter, and he is speaking directly to you. They lift you out of the rattle and hum of that political to and fro, and they remind you what the church is all about, which ultimately is not about navigating the shoals of policy debates. It's about putting you in the presence of a merciful and loving God, and for one brief, shining moment, giving you a taste of the world that is to come. That was my experience this week, and for the rest of my life, I will be grateful for it. Thanks for watching. That is our show for this week. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and until we speak again, God be with you.